I'm Mary Fallon, Governor of the great state of Oklahoma. And today, like most Americans, I'm urging President Obama to approve the Keystone XL Pipeline. With this project, we have the opportunity to support at least 42,000 jobs in our country, and that's according to the President's own State Department. Not only that, we can secure the safest, most cost-effective way to transport these resources, and we can continue building our energy future and reducing our dependence on foreign oil.
It is the most studied slice of steel to cross the American heartland since the metal itself was discovered and invented. It will create jobs. It won't create enough jobs. It will make Americans more energy independent. It will have nothing to do with gas prices in America. It will leave new oil spills in its wake. It's so safe you couldn't dent it with an army of sledgehammers. Keystone is back top of the news, but is America too tired of the discourse to really care at this point? Our guest is chairman of Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure, former CEO of the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. Brigham McCown joins us here in the studio. Pleasure to have you in the studio, Brigham. Thanks
Absolutely.
for coming in.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, here we go. You've heard all of it now. And the president, first of all, it is going to hit the president's desk. No doubt you don't think any late deals will be cut. This thing is going to get vetoed automatically done, right?
I think so, absolutely. Because as much as President Obama would like to have this off his desk, the Republicans are relishing in sticking him into a corner with it, and he's going to be forced to veto.
But is he really, is he really in a corner when you think about it? Because he said he's going to veto it all along. He claims that he has a lot of different stats and numbers, as everybody does behind him. And to be quite frank, it would seem as if the majority of the American public is now saying, come on, really, Keystone, do we still have to do this? And I think that that's hurting the GOP side.
Well, I think it's hurting both, because I think the elected officials were sent up to Washington to get along, and the Republicans were elected in a landslide to change the discourse, and we've got more of the same. But the president is intransigent on this issue, and until he looks at the facts and realizes, I think the Republicans are just going to keep going.
What is, in your opinion then, the single most important fact that maybe doesn't get talked about enough with regard to this pipeline for people sitting here wondering why we're still talking about it?
Well, what is clear is that the oil from Canada is making it to U.S. refineries, and it's doing that without Keystone. And so some people say, well, then fine, we don't need Keystone. But it's more expensive, and my point is it's less safe. And study after study has shown that transporting oil by rail or by truck or by vessel is about 3 times riskier than it is by pipeline. And so, you know, there's a reason why pipelines transport the vast majority of the energy products we use in our country each and every day. So based on the facts, we need Keystone built.
What about those who would say, to your point, that oil is going to go from Canada to the Gulf and it's going to get shipped around the world and it's not one drop is going to wind up here in America?
Well, you know, that would be true, except for the fact that there is a law against exporting crude oil. So the president's own administration would have to approve an oil export license to export any crude oil.
Even for Canada, because Canada is the one basically who's exporting at that point, isn't it? Isn't it their oil that they're sending out?
Well, and that's an argument made by some, but the U.S. has taken the perspective that once it comes into the U.S., it's U.S. oil and it's subject to the U.S. regulations. And major shippers, let's keep in mind that the producers up in Canada's oil sands, they're not really Canadian. They're by and large U.S. It's ExxonMobil, it's Valero. All of the shippers on the pipeline have said, we intend to use this in our domestic refineries because we need actually a heavier crude oil for our refineries to run, and that's where it's going to go.
Are you completely then assured in your own sense that if this pipeline gets built, it will not leak, it will not break, it will not destroy the environment or the grounds underneath it?
I can guarantee you that this is going to be safer than any other transportation method. Are there leaks? Yes. Last year we transported 11.3 billion barrels of oil and we lost about 32,000. So there are leaks.
How did we lose them? Was that, were we talking rail incidents, car into trucks, or where did it come from?
Well, these are all pipeline numbers.
All pipeline,
so
okay.
11.3 billion barrels and we lost 32,000. There are oil spills, there are leaks, it does happen. And the number one leading cause of oil incidents isn't from the pipeline, it's from people hitting the pipeline because they haven't called 811 before they dig.
So in other words, we're talking more about people harming the pipeline than anything else. You're saying that if the people stay away from it, you could have a fairly safe pipeline.
You'll have a very safe pipeline. And, you know, there is no absence of risk. The point is, how do you regulate the risk? And building the pipeline is the safest way to regulate that risk.
But now let's talk about another risk. Let's talk about fuel, if you will. Let's talk about gasoline, which it all comes down to.
Right.
The gas tax. Again, here's another one of those wonderful instances. We've got to have it because our infrastructure is completely falling apart, and without it, pretty soon you're not going to have roads, and bridges are going to continue to collapse across America. Other side, you don't need it. Cars are safer. Cars are better on the roads these days, and the money can be made elsewhere. Again, what's the truth?
Well, we certainly need a funding mechanism. We need to repair our infrastructure. Anybody that looks around can see crumbling roads, crumbling bridges, but 2 points. The first is we have to stop diverting money at the federal level and the state level that was destined for roads and bridges, and we're spending it on bike paths. We're spending it on transit systems. People probably don't realize that 20 to 30% of the federal highway tax dollar that you pay at the pump, 80% of that goes to 5 or 6 of the country's largest transit operators. So if I'm in Iowa, I don't want to be subsidizing New York City Metro.
Well, here's Iowa. 77% of Iowans oppose a 10-cent per gallon tax increase, yet we're told by other governmental wonderkins that, oh, wait a minute, America's okay with this if it's spent right.
Yeah.
Brigham, every time I come down to this, it's 2 stories to this, and every time I look at this, I keep thinking to myself, what about the massive amount of waste that's sitting out there right now? If you took that waste that you just talked about and put it to the infrastructure, you wouldn't need a gas tax.
Well, we need to fund our transit systems, but if it's going to be truly a user fee, those that use them need to pay for it. Same with the gas tax, and that's why a large majority of people I've spoken to favor taking the federal government out of it, and if the states want to raise their state gas tax, so be it. If they don't, then they don't.
So where are we going to go on this? I mean, put your crystal ball on, if you will, just look at it at the table. Are we definitely going to have a gas tax? Because it would seem as if we're moving that way.
We're moving that way, but I think the Republican leadership, especially the newer members that have just come in this time, are firmly opposed to any tax increase. And no matter how you look at it, it's a tax increase. And they point out, well, wait a minute, now that we're saving money at the pump, the government wants a bigger take. That's not right. So I think they're going to kick the can down the road. I think they'll patch the federal Highway Trust Fund for another year or so, and we're going to be having this conversation next year.
Isn't that can getting a little too dented by now, really, for the American public? I think we're tired of it.
I think all Americans are tired of it.
But there's no way around it, it would seem. Every time we talk or anybody else talks, it's always left or right is kicking it down the road. They don't want to take responsibility.
Well, and that's the trouble that we have in D.C. There's got to be a way that's not either an R way or a D way. There's got to be an American way, and we need to start thinking that way again.
And it would probably start with Keystone. Oh, but wait a minute, that's already taken care of. We already know that the president's going to do that. Brigham, thanks so much for coming into the studio. Always a pleasure. I look forward to talking to you again. All right, how does one even begin to think about feeling sympathy for a person who was involved in the killing and maiming of innocents during a public event? He is alleged to have been part of what happened at the Boston Marathon. And people now are saying that maybe we should feel sorry for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. That and so much more coming up when we continue right here on MidPoint.